Today we're going to talk about conflict between the medieval church and the state. Please go ahead and draw your Cornell note line. Don't worry about the summary line. We'll do something on the opposite page in class. Today's topics will include authority, lay investitures, the fight, and the Concordat of Worms. During the Middle Ages, you had the Roman Catholic Church with the Pope at the head, and of course, the kings, or in our case, Emperor Henry IV, both butting heads as leading political figures. You see, in the Middle Ages, the church had become very powerful. By 1050, it was the largest landholder in Europe. The church had its own law called canon law. In contrast, throughout Europe, kings divided up the territory. Each king was considered the supreme ruler of the kingdom, and they believed they, and only they, could command their people. One of the most common practices was lay investitures. Kings often would appoint non-clergy nobles to the office of the bishop. You see, the kings needed well-educated church leaders that they could trust, in effect, making them into vassals. In Germany, the bishop's office was both religious and political, as the emperor relied upon them to help rule the land. In 1073, a monk named Hildebrand became the Pope. He called himself Gregory VII. Pope Gregory VII was worried. Many of the bishops and abbots were powerful landholding nobles and worked with kings to extend their wealth and power. Because of this corruption, many people had lost respect for the church. So the Pope led a movement of reform. Specifically, he wanted to end lay investitures. When Pope Gregory VII issued a document stating that only the Pope could appoint cardinals and bishops, many German kings, including Emperor Henry IV, became upset. In an angry letter to the Pope, Emperor Henry addressed it to Hildebrand, not Pope, but false monk. He even called for Gregory to step down as Pope and descend to be damned. Pope Gregory VII excommunicated Henry IV on the spot, depriving him of the right of church membership, since it was believed that salvation or heaven could not be obtained without the church. Henry IV was essentially condemned. So the story continued as Henry crossed the Alps in the winter, finding the Pope in his castle in northern Italy. Barefoot he stood in the snow, wearing nothing but a rough cloak. For 3 days he was begging for forgiveness. The Pope finally did forgive him and readmitted him into the church. But the problem was still there. Kings needed support from the church, and they needed somebody they could trust. It would be 50 years later, long after the death of Pope Gregory VII and Emperor Henry IV, that a compromise was reached between the German kings and the church in a town called Worms. The agreement stated that the church, and only the church, could pick the cardinals, bishops, and abbots. But in a compromise, the church would allow the kings to give land and feudal titles, thus making the bishops vassals to the kings.